Got the shield. Oh, they coming right to him.
They're going right up to him?
Yep.
Where is the guy? Can you see him?
He's on the sidewalk. That's beanbags. It's beanbags. It's not rounds. It's beanbags. Don't you? Yo, somebody grab this thing.
It takes balls to follow him like that, to take him down like that.
It's probably not armed.
Some serious shots.
Yeah, he's dead.
At around 2:30 p.m., Albuquerque Police were dispatched to an active shooter incident near Tramway and Montgomery in the Glenwood Hills neighborhood.
Yes, we need you guys out of here. You're too close. You guys cannot see. You guys are in a dangerous area.
It was initial chaos as several police officers from several different agencies responded. A witness on scene told us he heard at least 15 shots fired from the house where the officer-involved shooting happened. APD Chief Harold Medina has confirmed that the suspect was killed by APD officers.
Shotgun. His 20 is 13309 Hidden Valley Northeast.
Before the suspect was killed, he killed a female and also wounded APD officers and civilians. This is a still developing story. Visit abqraw.com for updated information.
My friend called me. He lives next to me there, and he said he heard 15 shots.
Yeah.
So I guess it sounded like they took him out, or he was shooting out the window.
All right, everybody. As I said before, this was an officer-involved shooting. Very complicated set of circumstances. I'm going to have the mayor speak first, and then Chief Medina will give you the details. Thank you.
So I think to begin with, I just want to acknowledge today is another example of a tragedy suffered from gun violence in our community. Now, in this case, we have the life of a community member was taken and others were put in danger, as were our officers, because of gun violence. Now, first and foremost, we're praying for the victims and their families and also this neighborhood. We know that this was an extremely traumatic situation for the neighbors here. We want to assure them that we believe they are all currently safe. We took our time to make sure and do that. But we also know that 2 of our officers were hit. Fortunately, they are doing okay. They did not require serious medical attention. We can give you some details on that later. But I want to make sure we all thank our officers. They ran in and prevented something that could have been very, very dangerous to this entire community. And fortunately, they're okay. They did an outstanding job, as far as we know, making sure that this neighborhood was and is safe given what happened. And so we really appreciate, especially those 2 individual officers who were hit. And again, this is very challenging for them and their families, even if they're okay. And so keep them in your prayers tonight. And certainly they have the gratitude of the city of Albuquerque and the state of New Mexico. Now, our paramedics also jumped in to help in different ways. and our partner agencies also jumped to action. So I want to thank everyone who did everything they're supposed to in a situation like this to make sure that it was not worse. I also want to mention that this is yet another example of what happens when there is a gun in the wrong hands and it leads to violence. This is yet another clarion call in our city. We have to have every level of government focused on reducing gun violence, right? This is the third time we've been talking about this for like 14 days. And we know it's not new, it's been with us for a long time, but we have to stay focused on that. And there are some other details we want to go over, but I again just want to mention to the neighbors who I know some of them are still in their homes. I got a call from one of them who I happen to know, and they were so grateful to see the officers out there dealing with this situation and to know that they're safe. And so we again thank you to those officers who stepped up today. Chief.
A little bit after 2:30 this afternoon, officers were dispatched to the area of Tramway in Montgomery, just a little bit to the east, reference an individual who had sustained a gunshot wound. This individual is currently at the hospital recovering. Nothing seems life-threatening, but as officers arrived on the scene and as officers were making contact with this individual, they heard shots to the east of their location. By this point in time, several officers were responding. Officers made their way up the street. They discovered another individual who had sustained a gunshot wound. That individual actually transported themselves to a local hospital, is being tended to now also, and that does not seem to be life-threatening. At this point in time, officers observed a location where they believed shots had been fired. They made contact with another individual who was found to be deceased at this point in time. Officers then contacted a male subject as they were interacting with this individual. Two officers sustained gunshot wounds from a shotgun. They're both superficial. One was a graze over the eye, and he was able to have another officer drive him to a local hospital. Another one sustained some pellets below his vest. That officer was also transported. Both officers were in good spirit. I spoke to them both, and both of them should be fine from the physical wounds. At this point in time, the altercation led to an officer-involved shooting, and we have one male subject who is currently deceased on scene. It is still very early in the investigation. Officers are still trying to interview and piece this together. We will be out here through the rest of the night. Detectives will be interviewing everybody to try to figure out and piece this together. I think the important thing to remember is, the subject is deceased. There is no further threat to the community. Thankfully, our officers are safe and at the hospital, and there's nothing life-threatening. And I just think it's another example, like the mayor said, it's all too often that we've stood up here that our officers have been fired upon in the past, 3 years that I've been here, 4.5 years. And I think it's important that everybody work together to ensure that people are kept from guns who need to be kept from guns, and that the proper individual is kept in custody. I think this is a exercise for all of the criminal justice system and the city and the community to work together to find solutions. We can't let this divide us. We have to continue to work towards those solutions that will keep our city safe. As we have more information, we will release it out to the public, and once we get an initial briefing done, Gilbert will put out another press release.
How do we get that press release?
I'll send it out to the media.
Cool.
Anyone else?
Can you clarify the moments before the officers were fired? Were they talking to the person who fired the gun?
Still way too early for us to know exactly what occurred. We know there was some kind of interaction, and we don't know how it escalated or how it turned into an officer-involved shooting. Just way too early for us. Obviously, detectives will have to review body cam footage. They'll have to review the facts on the scene to see exactly what occurred.
So you don't know if the victims knew this one suspect?
We don't know. We don't know if the victims knew. Some of it seems like it could be random. We don't know that. We don't have that answer, and we'll have to wait until investigators are able to piece together who the victims are and what relationship they may have to this offender.
Did you say road rage incident?
That hasn't come up at any point in time.
Chief, can you clarify the number of victims that you have here?
We have 2 individuals on scene deceased. We have 2 citizens at the hospitals with gunshot wounds, and we have 2 officers at the hospital.
One of the deceased victims is the offender.
Okay. And one of the deceased is the offender.
So 1 victim dead, 1 suspect dead, and 2 civilians injured.
Yes.
And one other quick thing, as we said, all the officer-involved shootings, we will not know the perspective of the officers who fired their handguns until we do interviews with them, so we don't have that perspective yet.
Is it correct to say that the offender fired at the officers, injuring them, and then the officers fired back? Is that?
I would say that logically people could piece together if officers sustained gunshot wounds that at some point in time somebody fired at them.
And then the officers
we don't know
back.
the sequence of what occurred between the officers and the suspect at this time yet.
Would you say multiple officers fired their weapons?
Multiple officers did fire their weapons, and they'll be put on their standard leave as usual.
Did you guys know the suspect at all?
I haven't even gotten that information yet. We haven't had any positive ID on the individual, and we're still waiting to see what information we could find out from them.
What is the gender of the victims, of the two people who were injured in the first case?
I believe we have two males and two females. One deceased female, one deceased male, who we believe is the offender, and then a male and a female injured.
We've heard reports of a silver SUV that was firing shots at the community. Has that been confirmed in any way?
I don't think that has been confirmed.
And I've also heard that those officers took somebody out of a silver SUV, like right up there. Can you talk about that scene? What was that?
Don't know any details to that.
As we said, we still need to go through our briefing to get some of those details.
How quickly was SWAT here?
I don't know how quickly they were here.
Chief, are both of your officers men or women?
Our injured officers were two male officers, and tactical was en route as quickly as possible.
The scene with the suspect, was that at a house or on the street?
It was on the street, but it was focused on a house that the individual had entered into.
So that is important to know. I mean, this is in a residential area right here, and then we do have the police substation right there. So officers were on scene pretty quickly.
Did the suspect live at that house?
We don't know that. I mean, it's too early for us to tell. We don't even have a positive ID on the individual yet.
But he'd entered that house?
Yes, we believe it.
And then he came back out?
And then he came back out, as far as we know.
There were more or less 4 kind of scenes, if we could say that. There were the 3 scenes of the 3 people who were shot, and then there's the scene of the shootout with officers. Is that correct?
That's too soon to tell. I don't know how far distance the deceased
Where is it? Can you give us any other locations?
Just to the east of us on one of the side streets.
And then coming this way, coming toward Tramway.
Yes.
Pretty much
all along Montgomery and one of the side streets.
Chief, we had heard from neighbors that the police were being threatened by a hatchet from one of the people, from one of the subjects. Is there any confirmation on that?
We don't have any confirmation on weapons yet. All right, thank you.